Welcome to the Zeducation Podcast, where it's all about helping people and organizations unleash their greatness. The Zeducation Podcast features lively discussions.
When they share it, you see that they're beginning to feel empowered.
My heart, it's full of pride for me to be at Mai Samoa.
You don't necessarily need a degree these days. There's so many pathways to success.
Welcome to the Zeducation Podcast. In today's digital world, your story is your power. But if you don't own it and share it with intention, someone else might twist it. So how do you craft a message that truly represents you? How do you share your story in a way that builds trust, credibility, and influence without falling into the traps of misinformation or media spin? Today, we're sitting down with Dani Simpson, an investigative journalist turned PR and crisis communication expert. With nearly 20 years in media, Dani has seen firsthand how narratives can be shaped, twisted, or controlled. Now, she helps leaders and businesses take charge of their stories, communicate with impact, and avoid PR pitfalls. In this episode, we'll dive deep into owning your story, why it matters, how to craft it, and the best ways to share it so your message reaches the right people. We also talk about LinkedIn as a powerful platform for storytelling, personal branding, and connecting with your ideal audience. If you want to take control of your narrative, communicate with clarity, and ensure your voice is heard the way that you intend, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, welcome to the Zeducation Podcast. Before we dive in, I have a quick favor to ask you. If you enjoy this show and get value from it, help us grow by sharing it. Send it to a friend, post it on social media, and don't forget to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. The bigger this community gets, the more powerful conversations we can bring you, or to help you unlock new levels of success in your personal and professional life. Thanks for being here, and now let's get into the episode. So, Dani, thank you for joining us on the Zeducation Podcast. We're excited to have you. In fact, you are our first journalist, or past journalist, and the exciting work that you're doing around PR, crisis communication, social media, all that kind of stuff, which is very important, especially for businesses. So, look, we're keen to explore that, but before we do, icebreaker question, what is something interesting about Dani Simpson that not many people know about?
Well, this is a bit of an odd one. So a couple of years ago, we'd just moved into a house. We'd been in there 3 weeks and it was destroyed by a tornado. So not a cyclone, but a tornado. And obviously there's been one recently again up in Mangawhai, which was really, really awful. But when we went to contact the insurance company and go through that process, they actually didn't have tornado on their drop-down list of natural disasters. So they're like, oh, your house was destroyed by a cyclone. Like, no, it's one of those twisty things that, spins in the air. So, that was a bit of an ordeal. Do not recommend.
Oh, that is really interesting, but really crazy at the same time. And it's kind of ironic that, someone who deals with crisis communication, that's a big crisis right there. And hey, you don't really see many or hear about many tornadoes on the news in New Zealand.
No.
So it doesn't surprise me. There is nothing there in the drop-down menu. Yeah. But this is my funny connection to tornadoes. I served a mission in Texas, so I lived in the States for a couple of years. One of my first days there was a tornado.
Wow.
And I'll be honest, and it's crazy. Before the tornado, there's like hailstones.
Yes.
And they're like the size of golf balls. I don't know if that happened here in New Zealand or when you experienced it, but it's like it's just raining on cars, smashing windows and everything. I'm like, what the? And then you see the tornado, and the first thing I went to go look for was my passport. I was like, I'm ready to go home. I'm ready to go home. I'm out of here. Oh my goodness. But
but
hey,
you made it out.
Do not wish that on anybody. But thank you for sharing that. That's a great start to the podcast. But look, we're excited to start at the beginning in terms of your journalism, the past there. Because, for those who don't know, you have this business now. You're not a journalist anymore, but you've brought some of those experience and lessons from there.
Yes.
Can you tell us about your years of experience as an investigative journalist? Mm-hmm. What were some of the biggest lessons that you've learned that's really helping you in your business today?
Sure. I spent probably almost 20 years in media as a journalist and an editor, and investigative journalism was my absolute passion. So definitely was sort of on that side of things, asking some pretty tough questions. And when I decided to leave the media industry, the things I really took with me were those skills of understanding, I guess, what questions that a client was going to be presented with in an interview, and why, angles that journalists would take when presenting their story. And I think the biggest one for me, that biggest lesson that I took with me when I left, was you need to be prepared to tell your own story, because if you don't, someone else is going to tell it for you, and they're going to tell it in a way that may not be correct. It might be their truth, but it's not yours. So I will never ever tell a client that I think it's okay to say no comment, because it's never okay to say no comment if they're, are being approached by journalists for a story. In a vacuum of information, someone else will be prepared to fill that. So if it's a negative story or a positive one, if you're not prepared to share your part of that, commenting or sharing your perspective, that journalist will go and ask someone else for their opinion about you or your business. So absolutely essential that you tell your own story so that someone else doesn't jump in there and do it for you.
Yeah. And that's important, right? In terms of, you want to be in control of your own story. In other words, you want the truth. You want people to know the truth and the good side.
Absolutely.
If you leave it to other people, they're just going to give their opinion and their perception of it.
Correct.
All right. I guess in terms of social media, like journalism has changed a lot, drastically.
Huge.
And you see, and it's quite interesting because I'm not too sure where I saw this, but I've noticed, I saw a TikTok video, I think it was, or YouTube video, where they were talking about how media is dropping. It was Candace Owens. She was talking about in America, in the States, how news media, people are not watching it on TV and it anymore, right? The views are just dropping, like significantly, and people are going to like social media, influencers. With things like social media, do you feel like it's made things worse or better for journalism?
Oh, that's such a double-edged sword, right? In a way, it can be perceived as a tool to push content out there, and that was very much something I experienced before I left the industry, was the expectation that yes, we produced a weekly print product, but it was also a very strong online presence and strong direction in terms of our website contribution to the parent company's website. So in that respect, it is a way to get your stories out there and reach a wider audience. The flip side of that is, there are risks that come with that, particularly for businesses, and how your story is shared, and you only have to click on, the comments, for example, on a Herald story that may be linked on Facebook to see the hateful comments and things, and so it is a tool for good, but it is absolutely a tool for some pretty negative stuff out there too.
And you talk about story. It seems like it's a very important thing for businesses or even for yourself as a person. Like why is that so important? And I guess when you say share your story, what are we sharing? Is it like the origin stories of your business, how you were raised? Like what's a story, and how does a business go about sharing it?
Sure. So I think depending on what kind of business, whether you're a solo operator or a medium-sized business or whatever you happen to be, I think it's really important that whatever story you're telling is authentic. So I'll come back. Actually, I'll give you an example. So I've just taken on a new client. She's a woman in her mid-60s, and instead of thinking about retiring, she is embracing going out on her own. So she's been in corporate roles all of her life, now wants to be a digital nomad. She's got family in Australia and the States, and she's come to the conclusion that she's got all these incredible stories to tell and skills to offer, but she wants to be in control instead of just kind of falling into roles that she has over her lifetime. And so we sat down last week with her and went through, what is your story? Like, where have you come from? And she was, there's an element of having to be vulnerable in that, and her recognising that actually she's taken jobs along the way because they've been offered to her, not because she's been intentional, but that they just have fallen into her lap. And that's not to say she hasn't had a really interesting life. She has, and she's loved her roles and they've shaped who she is today. But for her to go, you know what, here I am at actually 67 years old, I've still got so much to give, but I want to do it on my own terms. And for her to get onto LinkedIn, yes, she had an account, right? But she really didn't use it. And so helping her craft her story for her LinkedIn page, and then to have her, and I've just seen a post from her this morning before I popped in here, that, you know, she's owning that and she's posting on a regular basis and she's opening up about her journey, and that's resonating with other people. So it's kind of hard to put yourself out there and share that story sometimes, but there are elements that other people, it clicks with them, right? And it means that they might want to do business with you. You know, that she's already getting messages from recruiters and
Wow.
people in the sectors that she's really interested in, particularly not-for-profits, going, hey, we think that we can really work with you. So, you know, it's really powerful to actually put yourself out there and just be brave and tell your story. And that might be where you started in business, or it might be where you grew up, what your whakapapa is. But whatever that story is, it's something that your audience really wants to hear from you.
That's amazing. And I feel like sometimes people need that external intervention, that support. It's like, hey, let's step back from life a little bit. Let's review your life and let's figure out what the story is, and you know what the next chapter looks like and how we can use that story.
Yeah.
What's your advice around someone who needs help creating that story? You know, like what are some tips that you can provide to someone who is now ready to be like, hey, what's my story? I'm ready to step into the next phase of my life, whether it's a business or something.
Yeah.
Where do I start?
I think, you know, understanding what your brand is really important, and what you stand for. I think understanding that purpose is going to give you that sense of direction. And so I guess when you're talking about telling a story, it's probably the first step is just taking a step back and going, okay, well, let's say you're starting a new business. You know, going, well, why am I doing this? What is my why? What's my purpose? You know, what sets me apart from my competitors, and understanding what that is. So, you know, it might even be your flavour, that the way in which you present yourself. And I'll use my business as an example, Dynamic Media, which, you know, people who contact me out of the blue, or they've been referred and they check out my website and they go, oh, there's some swear words on there, and I'm kind of unapologetic about that. That's me, and often if I, you know, crisis comms client, for example, sometimes a CEO who will call me and say, Dani, I'm in the, and they're really, it's quite, yeah, I respond to that. That's cool. I'm an ex-journalist. Newsrooms are full of really bad words and dark humour. So that's who I am. And, you know, people have gone to my website and gone, oh, I'm not really sure if she's quite the right fit. And that's absolutely fine, because that's a win-win for you and your client, right? If the story that you're telling on your digital platforms resonates with them, and then they go, yeah, I really want to work with this person, you've straight away struck a relationship, right? Before they've even picked up the phone, they feel like they know you. There's a part of your story that just clicks with them. Or it might not, and that's totally fine, because they're not your target market.
And I think it comes back to who as well, you know, and I've heard this before. I think it was Stanley Henry, who is the founder of Attention Seeker. I don't know if you heard of them. They work with Vodafone and Pizza Hut, so there's some of the big brands. And I asked him a similar question. I go, where do you start in terms of a story, you know, crafting that? And he says, start with who. Who are you speaking to? Like, what do they care about?
Yes.
Right? Because you've got to tailor your story in a way that resonates with them, whether it's a problem that you can help them solve, that you've been through and struggled. And so I like that. And in terms of what separates a good story from a great story? Like, I mean, like think of a story that's really stuck out to you, and like, what were those pieces that made it great?
Yeah. I think it's something, you know, that really resonates with the heart and mind of the person who reads it, right? That there's something in there that they just go, huh, and they wanna keep reading. And then there is a real art to storytelling. Feature writing was also, you know, a passion of mine, and so that that really makes me so happy reading a fabulous feature story. You might pick up the paper on a Saturday morning, right, and there's this really big, meaty read. And it doesn't start with, it starts with setting a scene, right? But it might start with this really pivotal part of your story, not necessarily at the beginning or the end or the middle, whatever, but just, I guess, a part of the story that is kind of has that wow factor. And I'm not talking clickbait because I just can't stand clickbait. But, it's about setting a scene based on what's this aha moment? What's that one big thing that kind of can kick off a story? So, it might be, the time that you had this incredible idea that just came out of the blue and you decided that was the kind of essence of what your business is going to be, or something that you really wanted to do that struck a chord with you, and to actually start your story with that aha piece. That, for me, I think is the biggest part of making a great story, just a good one.
I love that. I had the opportunity yesterday. We had a graduation at Spark Foundation. We've delivered some programs to some of the interns, and I had the opportunity to speak there. And it was short notice. I don't know what to share, but the first thing that came to mind was the story of Zeducation. So I got up there and shared a few words, and I go, you guys probably don't know, but a lot of people ask me, why did you start Zeducation? Like, what inspired you to start a business, especially in education?
Yeah.
And I told them the answer was, it started with my parents and how they raised me, and as ironic as it sounds, my parents were high school dropouts, no qualifications whatsoever to this day.
Wow.
But they inspired, they encouraged all 7 of us children, education. They just drilled it into us.
Mm-hmm.
And education was hard for me, don't get me wrong. A bachelor's degree that should have taken me 3 years took me 4.5 years.
Yeah.
I just struggled, but I
you
never
stuck it
gave
out.
up
Yeah.
because of, and I eventually ended up getting my master's degree, ended up being top of class, etc., and started my business eventually and worked in corporate. But the reason why I share that is because that was my story.
Yeah.
Like, I got up there and it just felt natural.
Yeah.
And I just saw the people's faces. They were like, they could resonate with that.
Right.
And I said the reason why, and it was easier to transition from, into graduation. The reason why I share this is because my parents helped me and my family. And it's like, don't forget where you come from and those who have supported you to help you get to where you are today.
Absolutely.
It's storytelling.
It is. And it's personal, right? It's really personal.
Yeah.
It's part of your journey, and now you get to share that with other people. So
Yeah. And it's not easy. I mean, like you said, it's an art.
Yep.
And like with art, takes practice and practice and practice. And you've given us a few tips. Thank you very much. But on the flip side, what do you think are some mistakes that people make when it comes to crafting their story and then telling their story, whether it's through social media, PR, etc.?
Sure. Look, I think it's not necessarily always about telling the whole story. I think it's about telling the story that explains, I guess, who you are and what that business stands for, and is going to resonate with your audience. And I'm not talking about, falsifying anything. I'm just saying that sometimes less is more. And so that, example that you just shared there of that, where Zeducation came from is the ideal example, right? It's like it was your parents drilling that into you and your siblings about, if nothing else, then education is absolutely what you need to concentrate on. There's more to it, right? There's other aspects of that story, of your journey along the way, but the nub of it is that. And so I think, you can craft a long-winded story, but actually the way that I tend to write is, if I'm crafting a story for a client, we'll sit down and do a deep dive, and I'll be taking notes for that entire session. So I've got screeds there, right? And some of that might lend itself to social media posts or whatever, but at the end of it, what we kind of come up with is just the very essence of who they are and what they're all about. So from a positive storytelling perspective, that's crucial. When you're talking about crisis in a business and having to tell a negative story, it's really interesting. I will see news stories about, businesses that have dealt with issues or what have you. And the ones that the stories that keep on going and that the media keeps feeding on are the ones that are dealing with the crisis very well. And crisis comms is not actually a complicated science. There's nuances to it, but essentially it comes down to three things. So 1, here's what's happened. 2, we acknowledge it's happened, and if you can say you're sorry and your lawyer says it's okay to say sorry, then do that. And 3 is here's what we're going to do to fix it. And you'll see businesses that go, oh, yep, this thing happened, but they don't say sorry, they don't own it, and they don't tell you what they're going to do to fix it. And so that's where the media will feast on a story. And just this week, in fact, Fergburger down in Queenstown is a great example of a business that handled a crisis really well. They had a staff member there who had served a chap of Asian descent, and on the receipt they had, instead of writing his name or whatever, there was sort of a racial slur referring to his ethnicity. And so this came out, and by the end of that day, they had sacked the staff member and said, look, we're going to commit to doing better. We're going to, do training, cultural training with our staff. We don't want this to happen. It's not acceptable, right? So there might be a follow-up story, but that's pretty much it in a nutshell. They've owned it. They've said, this is what happened. We're really sorry that it happened, and here's what we're going to do to fix it. There's nothing more for a journalist to feast on, because you've gone, okay, we've owned it. It's not okay, but we're going to fix it. So in that respect, that's where it's really important to own your story and tell people what they need to hear in those situations.
I love that. So there's two things that stand out for me from what you just shared. Obviously, the first part is you don't have to tell your full story in terms of, like, if you've got a whole book, for example, you don't tell you share the whole book. You might share chapters or parts of those chapters, just giving people enough, which makes sense. But also on the crisis communication part of it, that example is interesting because a lot of people can panic and then they just make things worse.
Yes.
Especially when you're in panic mode, you're afraid. Sometimes you say silly things. You end up regretting later.
Yeah.
So what you're saying there is breaking it down and be like, what happened? Acknowledging it. What are we going to do to fix it?
Correct.
So when you're saying if you share those parts of it, you really don't give any bait to journalists to kind of twist it.
Exactly. Because you've owned it, right? You've basically kind of taken the fuel out of the situation and removed their ability to say, if, for example, you've just said, okay, yep, we had this incident and our staff member wrote this racial slur on the receipt, and you left it at that, then they're going to go, well, hang on, are you sorry about that? Like, how do you feel? Like, surely, that's a shameful act for your business. And if you're not going to say what you're going to do about it, then that's their fuel to come in and say, well, surely, if you have a look at your Google reviews, this isn't the first time it's happened, so how are you actually going to nip it in the bud? And they just feed on that. And so, because if you've just stopped it, oh, yes, this thing happened, that's where they get their oxygen and just keep on keeping on.
Hey, quick break. If you're an employer or business owner who's passionate about investing in your people, Zeducation can help. We're a trusted training provider offering literacy and numeracy programs to build essential skills alongside leadership, communication, conflict management, and even tech training in Microsoft Excel and AI. We also provide financial education on budgeting, home ownership, and retirement, as well as personal well-being programs. Plus, we deliver cultural diversity training to help create more inclusive and high-performing workplaces. Not sure what your people need? That's okay. We can help with that too. We offer needs analysis to identify skill gaps and ensure all training aligns with your business goals, developing the right capabilities to drive real success. What makes us even more cooler? We're a proudly Pacifica and Māori-owned business, and we know how to truly engage and empower our people. So if you're ready to level up your team, get in touch with us today at www.zeducation.co.nz. Now, back to the episode. Yeah, well, that's definitely interesting because especially with social media, and just one little thing can be blown out and the whole world will know it. So, that's, like you said, social media is a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Like it can scale, your message, whether it's good or bad.
Yes.
But on like say for example, someone's ready to put out a story, whether it's how do we fix this solution or manage this crisis versus like I want to grow my business, I want to get my message out there. PR is about public relations, right? So you got to be mindful of the public and how they would react, right? So this is different than just posting to your followers,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So what's some advice that you can give to businesses, things that they got to think about when it comes to like PR? Because that's a whole different ballgame.
I think it's not having all your eggs in one basket. So if you're sitting down and going, okay, we really want to grow our business, or we want to break into a new market, or whatever that objective is that you're trying to work towards, understanding what your channels are. So media is one of them, absolutely. So when you're looking at it and going, okay, well, let's say, for example, we've got this really innovative, cool new product that we're going to take to market. So yes, there might be an element of, courting some media coverage, some what would be earned media, written by a journalist or a third party, and that story is then in their hands, obviously, so you have less control over that narrative. And then there's obviously your own channels, right, where the story is yours to own and yours alone. And I think people shouldn't underestimate that. I mean, there's always a place for, media coverage if there's news value in that. But I think more and more these days, people absolutely need to place real value in their own digital platforms, whether it is their website, whether it is their social media pages. Because ultimately, if you've got your branding right and your audience is there, that is your market. They are already hopefully engaged if you've been doing your job right in terms of your PR and your marketing and whatnot. So, I think that's really important to consider that telling your story direct to audience is enormous.
That's a really good point. Right, your target audience, and I guess it comes back to what's your purpose, what are you trying to achieve as well. But let's say a business wants to get their stuff on the New Zealand Herald, wants to get noticed, get in the public eye, wants to get some acknowledgement for some amazing mahi that they're doing. Like, what's the best way to approach, like New Zealand Herald, for example, or any other news media or journalist, to try get your story out there?
Sure. I'll preface this just with a little bit of background, I guess, in terms of where the media environment is these days, because getting a positive news story is not that easy. And it's not that easy because clickbait, right? So if you look at the media environment, we've had loads of redundancies. There's another round of like 30 staff going from NZME's Herald and possibly Business Desk this week. Some really big names who have been around the industry for a long time are going. And the thing is, it's hard to make money in this industry these days. They've been giving away content for free for a long time. So they rely on eyeballs on a website, right? And if you I'm just going to throw some numbers out here as an example. Let's say that you as an advertiser have $1 million to spend on a week-long campaign, and you go, well, where am I going to put my money? Am I going to pay for the front page of stuff, or am I going to pay for the homepage of the Herald? And if the Herald has got, let's say 500,000 more eyeballs on there every day, you know where you're going to put your money, right? So they run stories that they know people will engage with. And those stories tend to be ones that are sensational, or, there's tragedy, there's chaos, it could be a celebrity scandal, whatever the case may be. But therein lies the problem, is that, people feed on that kind of content. And so, if you've got a story there that you're trying to pitch to the media and they go, well, yeah, it's a positive story, but is it going to generate as many eyeballs and clicks and someone staying on that story to read it the whole way through? Or am I better to put my time and energy into a story that may generate more clicks and what have you? Because, well, in my very first week of journalism school, way back when, we were told that if it bleeds, it leads. And that's still true today. So a negative or sensational story is always going to generate more interest than a positive story. So it's absolutely worth pitching positive stories to media, and and making sure you've got a really strong news hook, making sure it's really timely, it's really relevant, it's really interesting, but equally not relying on the media to tell your story, because if it's a positive one, it may just not register with them, right? So coming back to your own channels, your own audience that you've already built is a much better bet. It's a surer bet.
Yeah. Well, what are the consequences if news media or journalists get the story wrong? Like it wasn't true, but they still published the article anyway.
Yeah.
Are there any consequences?
Look, there's
that?
the media council, right? So you can complain to the media council. You can go directly to the publication and explain what was incorrect and hope that they would correct that, particularly in the online version. But you know what? If you haven't caught it in time and that story's gone to print in the paper, then it's there, right? And so if they acknowledge that they stuffed up, then you might get a little, correction on whatever, page 3, page 5, wherever they've got a gap. So there's not a huge focus on correction. I always tell my clients, if you're being interviewed by a journalist and you're a little bit unsure that, if they've actually got the messaging correct, always reiterate to them that you can come back to me and feel free to fact check anything along the way, so that you're trying to offer a backstop to make sure that what they do publish is actually fair and balanced and accurate.
Yeah. I had this cool experience because I want to start shifting gears here, because I want to talk about the value that you add to your clients, especially with dynamic media, the amazing work that you're doing there. Especially around LinkedIn, right? Leveraging LinkedIn to tell your story.
Yeah.
This example I thought of was, this was a couple of years ago. I spoke at the Retirement Commission conference. So they had fintech, banks, government, everyone was there. I spoke there about the work that Zeducation did. And I got also interviewed by Stuffs, and they published an article about the work that we were doing. But all of that happened because of my presence on LinkedIn. Like that's the only reason why all these opportunities, these domino, happened, was because they found me on LinkedIn, and that was so important. And you talked about on the way here, one of your clients posted on LinkedIn, and that seems like a big part of your service or recommendation is leveraging LinkedIn. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure.
How is LinkedIn useful for leveraging your story?
Yeah, it's such a great platform for that, for making those connections online and then taking them off, right? And me being here today is exactly the result of that. So we connected, you reached out and this kind of mutual, hey, I want to know what you do, I want to know what you do, and here we are, and this is awesome. So it's, if I take that new client, for example, explaining to her last week about, hey, yes, it's important to I guess, capture your, your work history and stuff, but that is just kind of bullet points. The most powerful part of there are those posts and the articles, and sharing elements of your journey or nuggets of wisdom that you're happy to give away for free, right? It's sharing those bits of you and your experience that other people can use in business. So there is a really large element of generosity on that platform. And I love it for that. Yep, sure, sometimes there's people who kind of slide into your DMs and that it's all about selling you something, and that's it's not cool, but hey, they're just a delete away, and that's fine. But those real human connections that you go, oh yeah, oh, that sounds really interesting. I want to know about Pussy and Zeducation, right? And you asked about me, and now here we are. And it's cool. And hey, I might have a client that comes along and goes, oh, I really need this kind of workplace training. Pussy's your man, right? And so I think it's just, particularly here in New Zealand, that real culture of, generosity is alive and well, and people are interested in other people's stories. So talk about connectivity, right? I mean, there's connections from all over the world that I talk to this day. From, I think it was probably about 9 years ago that I started out on LinkedIn and use it sporadically. I probably need to be a little bit more consistent and take my own advice. But yeah, it's so powerful.
Yeah, I love LinkedIn. if anything, out of all the platforms that we have as education, LinkedIn is probably the most ROI tool that we have. Like a lot of the leads
Yeah.
come through LinkedIn, and that's why I invest so much time on there. And I love LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn science. I just love how it works, right? And trying to figure it out. What's your advice around, in terms of, you talked about bite size of your journey or your story. You don't want to post the whole book, for example. If we use my example, like Zeducation, what I shared, what parts should I share? How much in a post?
Sure. I think it's taking a central theme or an idea or a scenario, an experience, and hooking a post around that so that there's one kind of central theme runs through it, right? Because you're limited by character count, and so you need to keep it quite succinct. So when I start one, I'll often kind of think, here's a concept. And actually just the other day, my husband was like, you haven't written about the time that you worked at the Irish Sun, right? So my first husband and I did a short OE in Dublin, and I was a temp at the Irish Sun. And so my now husband was like, hey, you really need to write about that, because there were some crazy stories. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'll have to think about that. And it is like such a tabloid, right? The stories are ridiculous, but you used to get these phone calls from these mad Irish men and women with these crazy out there stories. And it was just bonkers, but it was also hilarious. And I'm going, oh yeah, how am I going to hook a post around that, where you're essentially it's an English-speaking country, right? But the accents are so thick. And there I am as this early 20-something Kiwi girl trying to work out what this woman is talking about, this crazy story that ends up, being a page 3 story in the Irish Sun. And
Really? Wow.
just hilarious, bonkers stuff. And so I think it's just things like that where, I'll put that together and someone might read and go, oh yeah, I remember the time that I did my OE, and just, those kind of human experiences where you're like, oh, what did you learn from it? What did you take from it? So, something kind of quirky. It doesn't matter what it is. Just one little spark is all it takes to, come up with a story. And that new client that I was telling you about, I said to her, keep like a spreadsheet or just a running tally of things that if you happen to wake up in the middle of the night and go, that's a great idea for a post, just write it down and then ponder it the next morning and just draft it and work on it and see how it comes together.
Yeah. Have you heard of the 3 E's of social media, like posting out content, 3 E's of content? So content that educates people.
Yeah.
Or content that empowers people, like just inspiring, like quotes and stuff.
Yeah.
Or content that entertains people. And apparently the entertain is the one that gets the most view and stuff. But I think, what you're talking about there, even if it's something quirky, but in it is a gem.
Yeah.
Like whether it's a lesson, whether it's a aha moment, or maybe it's just something, that, made me feel good.
Yeah.
So I really like that. How often should we post on LinkedIn, do you recommend?
I think probably about 2 to 3 posts a week. Good. Probably 3 is about your ideal. And I've not really delved into the science of this and if it's a thing, but I've always found that posting first thing in the morning tends to get the best engagement. And I don't know if that's just because, we're maybe at our desks before we kind of crack into the day or whatever. But yeah, for me, it is definitely that sort of, right, I'm at 7 a.m, I've got my toast and coffee and I'm scrolling LinkedIn on my phone. I'm like, I have a little bit of a, hi there and comment here and then I might go and write my own post. So, yeah.
I like that. It's interesting you mention that, because I feel like that's what LinkedIn is for me. I feel like it's different to Instagram and Facebook. It's actually a professional platform where I go on there, see what everyone is up to, what's interesting, and it's actually quite relevant to my professional life.
Right.
I don't feel guilty when I'm on LinkedIn, because I feel like everyone on there is professionals trying to add value.
Absolutely. And isn't that such a huge shift? Because I remember before I left media, there was this sort of thing of, if you were on LinkedIn or on Facebook or something, the boss would walk past and go, why are you on social media at work? And you're like, I'm actually working. It's actually part of what I do. And so, yeah, there's no guilt attached to LinkedIn. Like, it is part of our professional realm.
If anything, I think employers should encourage their employees to be on LinkedIn more because it is the best networking tool out there.
Hands down.
I mean, like, look, that's how this came about,
Yeah.
you and I having a podcast interview together.
Yeah.
It was LinkedIn.
Absolutely. And, I've done workshops with companies that vary in size from 6 employees to 60 and in all manner of roles. And they just get so much value out of it. And some of them are like, oh, I'm not really sure about putting myself out there. And others are like, yeah, I'm really excited to, to embrace this and see where it could take me in my role. And yeah, it's different for everybody, but it's such a powerful tool. If you're not on there, you're definitely missing out.
Oh, 100%. What are your thoughts around AI? Like using things like ChatGPT to help you craft your stories, create posts and stuff. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a really interesting one in the world of PR. There's been a little bit of, not scaremongering, but I think, I'm probably concerned, like, is it going to take jobs away? I don't believe it will. I think there's still real value in that human connection. For me, AI is actually a productivity tool. So if I'm sitting at my desk and I'm like, I've got to put together a piece of content or starting off maybe a comm strategy or something that I'm just a little bit stuck on, I'll pop a couple of questions in there about the client or the content topic or something just to get the ball rolling, and then I'm away, right? And just testing out some different platforms. Like, yes, ChatGPT is good, but actually I love Perplexity because it gives you all these citations. So you can actually go and fact check yourself and make sure that what it's telling you is on the money. So it's such an interesting tool, but as I say, I think, in my world, I think the connections and the storytelling and the humanness and authenticity, like a bot is not going to replace that. You can't sit down with a robot and expect to tell it your story to it and it to get the essence of who you are, or even the tone, right? Because we say that the way that you say something has such a powerful impact, if not more than what you're actually saying. So as long as we've got that human connection, I think it's, hopefully adding to that rather than taking away.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast. I listened to Marketing School, Eric and Neil Patel. But anyway, they were talking about how Google has now, they're able to detect AI, generated content, like blog articles, etc.
Yeah.
So now, just being mindful of that. Like, Google and that are looking for authentic.
Yes.
Not just copy and paste.
Absolutely.
As well, right?
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, it's what gets the views and stuff. And sometimes people might not be able to tell, but it's how you tell that story that's important.
Sure. Yeah, I think there is absolutely a place for it. And you will see these days, on stuff, for example, at the bottom of a story, might be a court story or whatever, that it says this was created using AI and checked by a senior journalist before publication. And, like if you didn't have that little line at the bottom of the story, you probably wouldn't know any better. Like, it's done a really great job of producing a factual news story. Here's what's happened, and bang, it goes in the paper or online. And if it is just a simple story, cool, that's all good. But it's a fascinating one that I think we're all trying to get our heads around how it's going to work. And I mean, my daughter came home from school last year. She was in year 11, and she was like, "Mum, my teacher's had a go at me because she thinks that this, piece that she was writing for English I've used AI." And I was like, "Well, did you use AI?" And she said, "I use it to research, but it's all my own writing." And she's quite a switched on thing. Like, she's, her vocabulary is good. She's the daughter of a journalist, right? So we went and had a chat with the teacher, and I was like, "Hey, no, she actually is using, AI in a responsible way. That, here's the sites that she's gone and, fact checked and bits and pieces. But actually, the language is her own. The structure, the flow, the ideas are hers." And so, there's so many parts of society, teachers included, where, going, well, how do I know? How do I know that that kid hasn't just ripped it off, Chat GPT and put it into their school report? So I think it's something we have to kind of grapple with. But ultimately, I think if we look at it as a productivity tool, that's got to be a good thing.
Yeah, like you said, it's very tricky, and even with technology and new change, you're going to have people that resist, especially a system like education system who are not quite familiar with it. But in my opinion, AI is the future.
Mm-hmm.
I just attended a networking event last week, and what was her name? I think her name was Janice, but she co-founded Media Design School. She also founded Academy X, online tertiary, or so she knows AI a lot. She travels around the world, sits on a few boards, and she talked about how AI is different to like having the internet, all those different technologies that came in those eras. Like AI is just a huge beast, and we have to learn to embrace it.
Mm-hmm.
And even schools as well, and not look at AI as a crime if students use it.
Yeah.
But how do I embrace it?
Yes.
Right, to improve life, for example. But it's interesting, the AI thing. This, as we draw closer to the end of the podcast, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of share your story. What is Dani Simpson's story?
Yeah.
And then also, on top of that, maybe talking about how you can help people with their story through your business.
Sure. Okay, well, potted version. So I loved writing in high school, and I had this phenomenal media studies teacher, Ms. Janae, who was encouraging us to come up with stories for the school newspaper. And at the time, I was a huge All Blacks fan. Christian Cullen was like the ultimate, and the All Blacks were training just around the corner from my school ahead of a match against Argentina in Hamilton. And so I said to Ms. Janae, do you reckon that I could basically wag school and see if I could go and score an interview with some of the All Blacks? And she was like, sure, wink, wink, off you go, I won't tell. And so I went around there and hit up their media manager, Jane Dent, at the time, and said, hey, look, I'm looking for a story for the newspaper. Would I be able to, interview a couple of the guys? And she said, come along to our press conference the following day and we'll sort something out. And so she lined up an interview for me with Christian Cullen. And for me, that was just the start of meeting such interesting people with amazing stories to tell, and the honour of actually being allowed to tell them that someone is trusting you to tell their story is so powerful. And I'd have to say I never took that for granted as a journalist, that, someone who has suffered tragedy, for example, the husband of a zookeeper in Hamilton who was mauled to death by a tiger, that's enormous trust by that man to say, I'm prepared to help tell my story, for the sake of my children, for the sake of my wife, to honour her, and to be able to write that is massive. And so, that's pretty major. So story has been a love of my life right through. And probably one that my own personal story. So I actually had my daughter, and then my first husband was diagnosed with a brain tumour, and we lost him in 2012. We had a couple of years from when he was diagnosed to when he passed away, and there were lots of lessons along the way in terms of resilience and who are your real friends and who aren't, and those sorts of things. But I think ultimately it was a really powerful kind of way to, I guess, share my story, which I have done actually on LinkedIn. There's a couple of articles sitting in the back there that really kind of delve into, some of those dark times and how they've helped shape me as a person. And I guess I kind of take that into what I do with my clients now, is that particularly the crisis comms clients, they are probably my favourite. Not to say I don't love all of them, because I've got a great bunch of clients, but the crisis comms clients come to me and they've either got something that is just about to turn really nasty, or they're already dealing with journalists are all over them, or, there's been a front page story already. And they're actually in a really bad place because they probably don't know how to deal with the media. They've never dealt with a journalist before. They have no idea what's going on. They can see that their business, that their reputation, their livelihood is at stake. And so they're actually in a really dark place. And like the privilege of going in and sharing someone's story, it's a real honour and privilege to actually sit with that person and go, okay, I can't fix all of it, but we can definitely help try to mitigate some of this and get things back on track. And it's costly, right, from a financial perspective, reputation. The emotional toll is massive. I had one client who came in one day and was just already in tears, and I'm like, well, there's the tissues. Do you need coffee or a whiskey? And he's like, maybe both. So you're actually as much a crisis comms professional as you are a counsellor, and sort of, I guess, someone sort of trying to guide them into safe waters. So, yeah, I think, what does that value add for my clients in that space? I think it is really that understanding of the media landscape and what stories journalists are looking to run and angles that they will pick up on, and helping coach those clients through what is the worst case scenario that they could ask you about, how are we going to own that, and helping them prepare for it. So it's those clients who aren't prepared to own the situation and fix whatever's happened are the ones that don't come out of it so great.
That's beautiful. First of all, thank you for sharing your story, and being open and vulnerable enough to share that. But, for those who are interested in learning more about her story, Dani said she shares it on LinkedIn. So go check it out on LinkedIn, look at her articles, and follow her as well and connect with her. And then also just around that crisis management, and, obviously it's your favorite, but I can see why it could be your favorite. It's because, obviously you support them in the journey. Mm-hmm. It's a transformation journey as well.
Definitely.
When you're putting their story and turning it around, and that maybe I can almost feel like that sense of relief that comes from someone who's actually listening to me, giving me a chance to give my story.
Yes.
And then who's also going to help me, turn it around.
Yeah. Well, it's someone they're walking along beside them, right? That they're like, okay, Phil, you're going to come and help take some of the pain away and guide us in the right direction so they're not all at sea.
That's beautiful. And again, thank you for sharing that, because it makes your business more than just a brand and a name. Now, we can feel like we can connect with you. Like, you're a human, you got the story. I feel like, if anything, it's going to help our audience trust you a little bit more. So, look, hey, thank you so much for, again, just being generous with your time and
thank you
sharing
for
your
having
insights. No, thank you.
Such an awesome chat.
But before we let you go, what is one big takeaway you want our audience to take from our conversation today? What would that be?
Ooh, one big takeaway. I think it's actually just, be brave and put yourself out there. Sharing your story is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And yes, it takes vulnerability, but if you do it authentically, it's going to open up so many opportunities that it's not funny. So just really just sit down, embrace LinkedIn, embrace telling your story, because honestly, there's people who will just resonate with what you have to say. So own your story. It's really powerful.
I love that. Great advice to end the podcast. And if people are interested in getting help with crafting their story, bit of PR support, crisis communication support, how can I get in touch with you?
Maybe just look up the website, so dynamicmedia.co.nz. Connect with me on LinkedIn, as you say. I'm always hunting around there. And always happy to have a chat over Zoom, or better yet, grab a coffee.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much, Dani Simpson, for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thanks, Pasi.
And that's a wrap for today's episode. If this conversation gave you something valuable, do me a favor, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, hit the follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. This show is all about helping you unleash your greatness, and the more we grow, the more we can bring you content that truly makes an impact. Thanks for being part of the Zeducation Podcast. Let's keep pushing forward, and I'll see you next time.